This week on Crossroads Politics.
The time is now, and the place is Indiana, and the state of our state is strong.
Governor Mike Braun makes his case for his first term and what he wants to do this year. Plus,
it's not about fraud. It is about the accuracy of calculation by the agency.
More restrictions for Hoosiers on SNAP benefits and Medicaid. We'll tell you why Democrats are attacking what Senate leaders are calling the most important bill. And big moves on education.
It will strip parents of their power.
From changes to IPS to cell phones in schools and cuts to child care vouchers. How lawmakers focused on kids this week. And more protests in Minneapolis after federal immigration agents shot another person. The president threatens a military crackdown as ICE adds another state to its operation. And finally,
Washington is all up in our business.
The race for Indiana's 5th congressional district heating up as another Democrat files to run. All that and more right now on Crossroads Politics. Hey there, welcome to Crossroads Politics here on WTHR Plus. I'm Dustin Grove. The 2026 legislative session now in full swing at the State House, and all were there this week for the governor's State of the State address. We're going to break that down with Indiana Capitol Chronicle editor Nikki Kelly about this in just a minute. But first, we want to head to the State House and Emily Longnecker. Emily, the governor hit on a lot of topics this week, including his goals for the year ahead.
Yeah, he sure did, Dustin. You know, before Wednesday night's speech, the governor released his 2026 agenda. And so much of his speech echoed what was in that agenda, but he said that affordability was his top priority.
In his second State of the State address, Governor Braun framed Indiana as a state that's strong and growing.
We're growing double the rate of Illinois, double the rate of Ohio, triple Kentucky's rate, and 6 times the rate of Michigan's. That's something.
The governor touted rising wages and growth he said was outpacing the national average. When it comes to the cost of living, Braun said he's focused on making life more affordable for Hoosiers in areas like housing, energy, and health care, announcing his support for several Republican-led bills to address those costs, including one on housing.
Home prices have surged because we aren't building enough, and unnecessary regulations are driving up costs. Representative Doug Miller has a bill that will get government out of the way, make it easier for Hoosiers chasing the American dream to buy their own home. I support it 100%.
If there were still any hard feelings left over from last month's redistricting defeat with the governor threatening to primary lawmakers who voted against it, Republican leadership in the House and Senate didn't show it.
With regard to that, look, there's lots of hard things that happen in this place, and we are going to continue to come to work and do good work for Hoosiers.
Democrats said the governor's focus on affordability was long overdue.
Thank you for finally acknowledging it. Better late than never. Because Hoosiers have been saying this for a long time.
Democrats also criticized cuts to child care funding and reimbursement rates that left some child care centers closing and families on wait lists for help.
Saying affordability matters is easy. Governing like it matters, and it's the test.
And Governor Braun also talked about the work that the Indiana State Police had done in the past year to get drugs off the streets. He credited that work with bringing down the state's overdose deaths. That had everyone in the chamber standing up, clapping for a standing ovation. Another moment of bipartisan agreement that brought everyone to their feet was when Governor Braun told everyone to wear their crimson and cream on Monday to cheer on the Hoosiers in the national championship. Dustin?
Yeah, that'll certainly bring everybody together. All right, Emily, thank you. Nikki Kelly, I want to bring you in here. Were you surprised by so much focus on affordability when that's normally been such a selling point about Indiana?
Yeah, and especially given the national conversation, which has been national Republicans pushing back on, saying things are just fine and interest rates are down, and they've been trying to sort of stem off that criticism. So for Republicans in Indiana to get on board with, making affordability a priority it was very interesting.
Any other surprises or big takeaways from the State of the State?
I mean, I would say my biggest takeaway, so this is the sixth governor I've covered, and usually the process is that the governors and their agencies come up with their own ideas, they craft their own legislation, then they find partners in the legislature to carry their bills. But none of that occurred. Instead, he just saw some bills that were already moving in the legislature and said, yeah, I support that one and I support this one. So he didn't really seem to have his own legislative agenda. So, I mean, I found that surprising just from a historical context that he's letting lawmakers take the lead.
Interesting. Okay, we'll check back with you in just a second. So we've heard what the governor talked about as far as the agenda ahead. We're also digging deeper this week into those topics and proposals that make up the Republican House agenda, including one, Emily, that would reduce the cost of building a new home in Indiana. We heard the governor touch on that just a moment ago.
Right, Dustin, this is the main bill for House Republicans this session. They call it their priority bill. They say it will expand Indiana's housing supply and bring down housing costs by rolling back regulations that they say drive up housing prices.
No one got a chance to testify about the bill Tuesday in committee. Only its author, Republican State Representative Doug Miller, who told the lawmakers on the local government committee that the bill would help with Indiana's housing shortage. House Bill 1001 reduces local government's control over zoning, design standards, and fees for building. It also increases oversight of local housing decisions so the state can better understand when a builder is denied from being able to come into an area and construct homes. Some critics argue parts of the bill could undermine local government control and change the character of a neighborhood if design standards like roof styles and exterior materials are banned. Supporters, including House Republicans, say Indiana needs more homes, and House Bill 1001 is a way to do that.
Think of this bill as providing common sense regulatory reform. As we debate which provisions to amend, I urge you to keep in mind that young adults need starter homes. And statistically, right now in the state of Indiana, young adults, first-time home buyers, are waiting until they're 40-plus years of age to move into the market. That's a challenge as well for a lot of price points.
Now, the committee heard a few other bills before this one, so there was just enough time for the bill's author to give details on this housing bill. No one testified about it. Testimony is expected this week, and that's when we're going to hear from members of the public about what they think about this bill, whether they think that it does enough, or some might even testify that it does too much. We'll have to see. Dustin?
Okay, we'll find out in the week ahead, Emily. Thank you. Nikki, this bill includes a lot of language meant to help not just homeowners, but apartment tenants too, right?
Yeah, I mean, the idea is more places for people to live at more reasonable prices, right? But the key is trying to thread this needle of reducing local regulations. For instance, one on apartments has to be with how many parking spaces have to be available. You know, there are lots of local zoning and regulations rules that affect that. That's just an example. But, you know, there's a key line that we have to find between having more affordable housing and just slapping up shoddy construction, right? And so that's the balance lawmakers are trying to thread.
Okay, so how much do you think this could change in the weeks before the session ends, before there's a final vote?
Oh, I think we'll probably see some amendments, and we didn't even get testimony, but I'm sure there are some local units of government who are going to push back on, you know, they don't want to preempt their own powers to control quality of, and that's the thing, we're talking about quantity versus quality, right? Yeah. And so we're definitely going to see some movement, I think, on that side.
Okay. All right, Nikki, thank you. Another area of focus for lawmakers and the governor is rising utility costs. And Emily, they're trying a lot of different ways to tackle this thing aimed at lowering power bills.
Yeah, Dustin, this bill has a lot to it. It is another priority bill for House Republicans. It was in their agenda that they released this past week. It is at the top of the list. And House Bill 1002 deals with the cost of electricity and the ways that House Republicans say they can bring relief to Hoosiers.
One of those ways is through budget billing, which means a customer's bill would be averaged out over the year to avoid big spikes in high usage months. Right now, someone has to ask to be put on budget billing. House Bill 1002 would make it automatic, with customers having the choice to opt out. The bill also creates summer heat shutoff protection, so someone's electricity can't be turned off for non-payment if the temperature is dangerously high. Right now, that kind of protection only exists during the winter. The bill also calls for electric utilities to offer support to low-income customers, something mostly handled right now by state and federal programs. House Bill 1002 also would require electric suppliers to come up with a 3-year rate plan instead of going to the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission every year to get approvals for rate changes. Rate plans would be tied to performance, like how quickly the utility company restores service after an outage. House Bill 1002 saw some support regarding the sections that include assistance for people who are struggling to pay their bills. Others voiced concern about how many times the electric company would re-average the bill of a customer using budget billing.
But the challenge is, especially if you're a low-income customer, if you have a large balance, a large arrearage, what happens to that arrearage? Do they have to pay that immediately? If so, from our perspective, we're going to exacerbate sort of unaffordability, increase disconnections, especially for vulnerable households.
Bottom line, House Bill 1002 would bring some big changes to Indiana's utility systems, specifically for electric utilities. The committee did not vote on the bill this week. Lawmakers said that they wanted to make some tweaks to it before a vote could happen. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Nikki, lawmakers certainly seem to be upping the pressure on utilities with some of this. There's been a lot of concern among Hoosiers over the last year or so when it comes to data centers, though, and these big power users that suck a lot of power. Do any of these bills address that, to your knowledge?
There's nothing in that bill that does.
Okay.
In fact, obviously, they're listening to their constituents who are, up to here with the high costs. But the majority of that bill does nothing to control the bill. It just has ways to cope with the bill, right? Putting you on budget billing doesn't reduce your bill. It's just, are you paying it a little bit more every month, or are you, dealing with the spikes? Also, low income protection, shut off protection, things like that. There's only one part of the bill that could actually in the future maybe impact rates, and that is basically performance-based rate making. And they're basically saying, look, if they come to us repeatedly and we see a lot of profit but no improvements, then we're not going to let them raise rates. And so that could have a future impact, but much of the bill is about sort of coping now.
All right, Nikki Kelly with the Indiana Capitol Chronicle. As always, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We'll see you next week. And still ahead, Indiana lawmakers tweak a bill to ban cell phones in schools. How they're giving some power back to schools. Plus,
don't push that horrible act onto a state employee.
one lawmaker shares his unusual proposal to make lawmakers who support the death penalty walk the walk. But first, lawmakers put more restrictions on who can get food stamps and Medicaid. Republicans say it's preserving the programs. Democrats demand the evidence. It's next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Republicans in the Indiana Senate call Senate Bill 1 their most important bill. And this week they talked about some of the details. I want to bring Emily back in here from the State House. Emily, there are a lot of those details.
I mean, a lot of them. Senate Bill 1 tightens the rules around SNAP and Medicaid eligibility, really to bring it in line with the One Big Beautiful Bill passed by Congress last year. Republicans have framed it as a way of preserving the safety net for the folks who need this assistance the most by rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Democrats asked where that was happening. They didn't get a specific answer this week.
Under Senate Bill 1, when it comes to SNAP benefits, the bill puts into law the governor's executive order that SNAP can't be used to buy candy or soda. It also requires the state to verify someone's immigration status before they receive SNAP benefits. During that check, if someone is found to be here unlawfully, the state would report them to the Department of Homeland Security. The bill's author was asked if that's an issue right now. I mean, do we know of specific cases where there are people who are here unlawfully who are getting SNAP from Indiana?
At this time, I don't know.
The bill also sets stricter limits on how much someone can make and how much in assets they can have and still be able to qualify for help. According to the bill, that could lead to SNAP participation dropping by more than 3,000 households.
Some may try to say this is cutting benefits. Let me be clear. This is about verifying benefits for those that are eligible. It's about compassion for the taxpayer and fairness for the truly needy. A system that is easily defrauded is a system that eventually collapses.
When it comes to Medicaid and the state's Healthy Indiana plan, the bill calls for more frequent eligibility checks. Right now, many people are approved for 12 months at a time. SB 1 shortens that timeline, with HIP members required to renew every 6 months, not once a year. If you miss paperwork or a deadline, you could lose coverage, even if you're still eligible. The bill also comes with stricter work requirements and more frequent checks if those requirements are being met. And just like with SNAP, immigration status must also be verified. Democrats pushed back on framing this bill as a way of rooting out fraud in Indiana.
They can message this bill in any shape, way, or form that they want. But until they bring to the table any specific case about fraud with prosecution, then that is not valid.
And the bill passed out of committee on Thursday. It now heads to the full Senate where more changes can be made. Dustin?
All right, Emily, thank you. Well, they say you shouldn't ask anyone to do a job you wouldn't be willing to do yourself. That's the position of one Indiana lawmaker when it comes to the death penalty. Republican State Representative Robert Morris says he's got support for his bill that changes who would carry out these executions here in Indiana. Quite a unique eyebrow-raising proposal here. So who would do the job, Emily?
Well, so under Representative Morris's bill, it wouldn't be the prison staff who carries out executions. It would actually be members of the General Assembly, lawmakers, legislators who willingly volunteer to do it. This isn't the first bill dealing with the death penalty Morris has filed. Last year, he had one calling for Indiana's death penalty to be repealed altogether. That bill never got a hearing. This session, Morris's House Bill 1287 would require the prison warden to form an execution team made up only of Indiana legislators who volunteer to be on the team. Names of the lawmakers on that team would be made public. If not enough were willing to volunteer, the execution wouldn't take place until a full team of legislators was available.
We should really leave those executions to the men and women that passed that law. Don't push that horrible act onto a state employee. Put it right here in the General Assembly and let members who actually want to carry it out and do it actually follow through with those actions.
Morris's bill isn't the only one this session dealing with executions in Indiana. Republican State Senator Mike Young has a bill to use a firing squad to perform executions. Republican State Representative Jim Lucas has a similar bill that also calls for lethal gas as an option too. Now, House Bill 1287 has been assigned to a committee, but so far it has not received a hearing. Morris has a co-author for this bill, and another lawmaker has also signed on to it in support. He says that this bill continues to garner support daily, so we'll see if that support is enough to get this moving through the legislative process. Dustin?
Hey, we'll be watching closely, Emily. Thank you.
And I'm talking about, lowering our utility costs. We are seeing Hoosiers, getting squeezed with those utility costs. I'm talking about grocery prices. I'm talking about people's rent, how it's way too high.
A state senator throws his hat into the ring for a congressional race in the 2026 midterm elections and banning cell phones in Indiana schools the whole day from bell to bell. Lawmakers tinker with the fine print at the State House. But first,
by creating an appointed board, it will strip parents of their power.
Lawmakers are moving forward with a bill that would let the mayor of Indianapolis choose the board for IPS. Why supporters of public schools and charters are speaking out. It's next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Lawmakers are considering a bill creating a new governing body that would trigger big changes for Indianapolis public schools and charter schools as well. Emily, that new body would be a board appointed by the mayor of Indianapolis, and then it would oversee several aspects of education within IPS, wouldn't it?
That's correct, Dustin. You know, the biggest concern we heard from people who testified this week about this bill was a concern that if this passes, that it would take power away from an elected school board and give it to an appointed school board, a move that many argued and fear would take away the voices of parents.
The proposed board has a name, the Indianapolis Public Education Corporation. The Indianapolis mayor would appoint the 9 members on it. House Bill 1423, that calls for this new body to govern IPS, comes from several recommendations made by the Indianapolis Local Education Alliance, or ILEA. Last year, lawmakers passed a law creating ILEA to look at the future of IPS and the schools within it. ILEA came up with several recommendations, including the new board, to oversee school buildings, transportation, and funding for all schools, both public and charter, within IPS boundaries. Part of overseeing funding would include figuring out how property tax revenue is distributed across IPS and charter schools. The recommendation of shifting control to a new board saw pushback Monday from both lawmakers and members of the public.
We have an elected school board with IPS. Why are we creating another layer of government where there is no transparency and it's very difficult to have any accountability?
By creating an appointed board, it will strip parents of their power, and that's not going to strengthen our schools. It will distance families from them.
The bill also calls for a new school performance framework that all schools would be required to follow. Chronically underperforming schools would face closure. Also under the bill, there's a limit on who can authorize new charter schools, something some charter school advocates pushed back on.
If House Bill 1423 truly aims to put Indianapolis students first, restricting authorizers undermines that very goal. I urge you to allow Indianapolis charter schools to retain their autonomy under their chosen authorizer.
Some parents testified in support of the bill, which would create a unified transportation system where all IPS and charter schools would have to provide transportation for students.
Creating a more coordinated transportation system would help ensure students can actually attend the schools that best meet their needs.
So if this bill passes, it would fundamentally restructure how public education is governed in Indianapolis. The House Education Committee didn't make any decisions this week on this bill, so stay tuned for more on it. We'll see what happens.
All right, Emily. And Indianapolis Mayor Joe Hogsett did send us a statement on this, saying in part, and we'll put it up here on the screen, he said, these recommendations only mark the first step in the process of adapting the educational landscape in Indianapolis, which now heads to the Indiana General Assembly for further consideration. Again, that statement coming from Mayor Hogsett. Another school issue covered this week is cell phones. At the State House, lawmakers are considering a proposed law that would create a near total ban on kids having access to their cell phone during the school day. Emily, what happened with this bill this week?
Yeah, lawmakers in the Senate took a look at this bill this week and considered it. It was a chance for them to make some changes, and they made some. Take a listen.
Lawmakers offered several changes to Senate Bill 78. The bill would put in place a near total ban on cell phones during the school day. Right now, under Indiana law, cell phones and similar devices like tablets are banned during class time, with some exceptions for students who need them as part of class instruction or to keep track of medical issues. Monday, 3 amendments to the original bill passed. The most significant change, lawmakers passed an amendment that would soften the near total ban and give schools more flexibility to manage how much access students have to their phones during the day. For example, teachers could allow cell phone use during class to help with a lesson.
This is good public policy for a teacher to have discretion to allow a student to use their phone in the classroom for academic purposes.
Lawmakers also adopted a change that would protect schools or staff from being sued while trying to follow the new law. A third change addresses student cell phone use for medical issues. The amendment allows students to have an order from a licensed healthcare provider from any state saying they need access to their phones.
The bill ultimately made it through to the next step, and the full Senate could have a chance to vote on it in the coming weeks. Dustin?
Emily, thank you. This week, we also took a closer look at the impact government funding cuts are having on child care centers here in Indiana. This is a story we've been following for months. Our Matthew Foltz has an update this week on what some child care programs are doing now to keep their doors open and how some state lawmakers are trying to help.
Good afternoon. They said good afternoon.
Here at Judah Ministries,
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Miss Alicia Jackson and her staff are making sure these students are well taken care of.
We opened our doors in February of 2003.
A long-standing daycare on the city's west side aiming to be a relief for low-income families. Now one of hundreds of daycares in the state needing some relief of their own.
The CCTF cuts have been horrendous for us.
CCDF, the Indiana Child Care Development Fund, saw cuts last summer. Jackson says they felt the impact.
Our budget is down $1.5 million in reference to the cuts.
On top of that, they decided to take pay cuts.
We've taken a humongous cut in our pay so that we don't lose the outstanding teachers that we have.
But Judah Ministries says they're grateful to still be open. According to the Indiana Association for Education of Young Children, at least 200 daycares closed across Indiana since the CCDF cuts.
It's about the investment, investing in human capital for the state of Indiana.
It's now why Indiana State Representative Greg Porter came up with House Bill 1026 to take money from the state's Financial Opportunity and Growth Fund and move it to the CCDF.
In that piece of legislation, there was $300 million set aside for Division of Child Services, Department of Corrections, and Family and Social Services Agency. So that money is there.
Now the bill just has to get a hearing.
We're hoping that Chairman Thompson will hear the bill. However, he's always a little skittish about hearing things.
It's a bill that Jackson also hopes passes to help so many families and children in need.
We would like for others to help us so that we don't have to solely rely on CCDF funding.
Reporting here in Indianapolis, I'm Matthew Foltz, 13 News.
Still to come, why an Indiana state senator thinks now is the time to challenge Congresswoman Victoria Spartz for Indiana's 5th congressional seat. And will the United States invade Greenland? NATO allies start planning for a previously unthinkable confrontation. But first.
If it were your city, it would be unacceptable there too. And for anyone that is taking the bait tonight, stop. That is not helpful.
Another shooting involving a federal agent in Minneapolis sparks more protests and threats of military force from the White House. It's next on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. This week, tensions continued to rise in Minneapolis after another shooting involving a federal immigration agent. Protests erupted, and on Thursday, President Trump threatened to send in federal troops with the Insurrection Act, as Ivan Rodriguez reports.
Heated clashes between federal officials and protesters erupting in Minneapolis Wednesday night after a federal agent shot and injured a man days after another protester was shot dead there.
I'm not mad at you.
The Department of Homeland Security says an immigration and customs enforcement agent tried to conduct a targeted traffic stop of a Venezuelan national who drove off, crashed, and fled on foot. When the officer caught up with him, DHS alleges the man resisted arrest and began to, quote, violently assault the officer.
Our ICE agents are following the law and running their operations according to training. Last night what we saw was 3 individuals weaponize shovels and brooms and attack an ICE officer that had to defend himself.
DHS Secretary Kristi Noem says federal agents are following the law and standard protocols. She also suggested people should be prepared to provide proof of citizenship to officers.
If we are on a target and doing an operation, there may be individuals surrounding that criminal that we may be asking who they are and why they're there and having them validate their identity.
In a Truth Social post, President Donald Trump threatened to invoke the Insurrection Act to deploy federal troops to the state.
The Insurrection Act is a tool at the president's disposal, and I think the president's Truth Social post spoke very loud and clear.
State and local officials are calling for calm.
I really hope that the president does not do that. That's not what our city needs right now.
As some residents fear what could come next.
I am very scared. I'm worried that I'm not even able to go to school and feel safe.
I'm Ivan Rodriguez reporting.
This week, we also learned the Trump administration plans to send ICE agents to Maine, which also has a large population of Somali immigrants and refugees. As for the Insurrection Act, That's an old law that has been invoked more than 30 times in U.S. history. Most recently was in the 90s during the L.A. riots, when then President George H.W. Bush called in the troops at the request of California's governor. You can learn more about the Insurrection Act, how it works, and the constitutional limits on its power. We've got all that posted at WTHR.com. The crackdown on Somali immigrants in Minneapolis and soon Maine comes as the U.S. stops processing visa requests from the country and many others. In fact, that list has grown now to 75 countries, including Brazil, Colombia, Egypt, Haiti, and Russia. Workers from those countries hoping to come to the U.S. will be automatically denied. A number of our NATO allies are now sending troops to Greenland to defend against the United States. President Trump said not getting control of Greenland would be, quote, unacceptable. Several European countries, including Germany, Sweden, and France, are deploying troops to Greenland to discourage a potential invasion from the U.S. The military is evacuating troops from a vulnerable base in the Middle East. On Wednesday, some personnel were evacuated from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is just across the Strait of Hormuz from Iran. Iran is in the midst of mass protests, as we've been reporting, that have left more than 2,000 people dead.
We owe it to the American people, to send people to Washington, D.C., like myself, and we owe it to the American people to work on their behalf.
A Democratic state senator challenging Congresswoman Victoria Spartz for her seat in Indiana's 5th congressional district. He makes his case next here on Crossroads Politics. Welcome back. Indiana's 5th congressional district is already seeing a rush of candidates eager to challenge incumbent Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz. Let's go back to the State House. Emily Longnecker, you sat down with the latest and Indiana State Senator.
Yeah, Dustin, Indiana State Senator J.D. Ford currently represents parts of Indianapolis, Carmel, and Zionsville here in the state Senate. Many of those areas are also in the 5th congressional district. Ford sat down with me for an exclusive interview before announcing his run. Take a listen. Senator Ford, thanks for being here today. Yes. You have an announcement to make. Tell us about that.
Yes. I have been hearing from so many folks, across Congressional District 5. My Senate district overlaps with parts of CD5. And, so many folks have said, you should think about doing it. And at first I just kind of said, nah, but, there's been a lot happening in our country. And so, this administration is doing a lot. And, I found myself at a fork in the road, quite frankly, about, taking my service to the next level. And ultimately decided, particularly after the redistricting vote, that Washington is all up in our business here in our state. And we need to have leaders to go to Congress, compassionate public servants, to go to Congress and push back on this administration, as well as continue to fight for everyday Hoosiers. That's what I've been doing in the state Senate for these past couple of years. And I'm talking about lowering our utility costs. We are seeing Hoosiers, getting squeezed with those utility costs. I'm talking about grocery prices. I'm talking about people's rent, how it's way too high. And some of our folks don't even have, protections if they're tenants, So, and just, we're talking about health care, we're talking about mental health care, we're talking about child care. All of these issues are what people are talking about as they sit down for dinner. And so for me, it makes sense that, I throw my hat in the ring and, give people an option this May and next November.
Is it hard to step away from all the work that you've done in the Indiana State Senate? Because you've done a lot. You've had some leadership positions. You're on quite a few committees.
Yes.
Had a lot of legislation.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of work there.
Yes.
So it's always hard, I guess, to start over?
It is, but I also see it as a continuation of my public service, right? And so for me, it is about, taking what I've learned in the state Senate and going to the next level, right? So on day one, I'm able to get in there and help, get things done. And so, yeah, it is hard to step away. Many good memories in that building. I love my colleagues dearly on both sides of the aisle. But I think this just makes the right sense for me to take this next level. And at the end of the day, I certainly wouldn't be doing it if I didn't have the people who have been approaching me. I get stopped in the grocery store and say, hey, I see what you're doing. Thank you for fighting for us. Have you thought about doing this, or have you thought about running for this office? And so, of course, I kind of just kind of shooed those comments away, but. Like I said, after the redistricting vote, and after seeing some of the stuff that's happening in our country, I feel like it's my patriotic duty. I feel like I should, take it to the next step and to continue my service of being a compassionate public servant who's going to listen to my constituents and do the very best that I possibly can. And I think, honestly, it's a contrast to the current occupant of the seat.
Do you think some of the reaction to what happened with redistricting will help not only you, but Democrats in the midterms, people responding here?
Well, I can definitely say that my district inbox was on fire. I mean, I'm talking about phone calls to the office. I'm talking about hundreds of emails. And I know the other side of the aisle like to say, oh, those are just out-of-state people. No, we were checking addresses. I mean, these were constituents. I mean, I know those names. I knocked those doors and I talked to those people on their front doorsteps, as I was out campaigning. And so I can tell you that these were Hoosiers, that were concerned about this. And this was just not Democrats. This was Democrats. These were Republicans. These were independents. I mean, there was a real sense that Washington is trying to steal our election, right? There's also this real sense of, hey, you guys said, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, hey, you guys said that these were good maps, right? This was fair representation in 2021 when we passed those maps. And it's only been 5 years, or 4 years, and now you're saying that those maps don't matter. And I think people had a real issue with that. And it's one of the best ways that I heard it described is that you got the goalpost and now you're trying to move it. And I think Hoosiers in general just don't like when they feel that the game is being rigged against them.
I know woulda, shoulda, coulda, but had redistricting gone a different way, would you still be making this same decision? And did you think about that at all?
Yeah, that is tough, because it's, I certainly don't want to, give up something that I've worked so hard to get, right? And then the people who put me there, and so it's really hard to answer that question, but I can't shake this feeling that I was at a fork in the road, right? I could either run for re-election and win back my seat, or I could, push myself out of my comfort zone. And I felt like I needed to push myself outside my comfort zone. I mean, we are seeing some unprecedented times in our country. And so because of those times, it calls for bold leadership. And I feel like this is my way of contributing to this conversation.
When you think about the national conversation, what concerns you the most? What are you looking at, or what's, I guess, keeping you up at night? Is that a safe thing to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think, people were relentlessly attacking the last president about grocery prices and inflation, and we're still seeing all that stuff. We're still seeing that, and the current president said that he was going to tackle all this stuff, and all of it was going to be done on day one. I even gave him a little bit of flexibility. I knew he wasn't going to do it on day one. I knew that was just kind of a way to say it, but here we are, almost a year in. And we're still seeing inflation pretty high. We're still seeing grocery prices, still pretty high. I mean, people are still struggling with their rent. So the promises that were made are not being kept. And so again, that's another one of the reasons why I decided to, to kind of pull the trigger and to get into the race. So,
are you anticipating any challenges as far as a May primary or anything like that? Do you know? I haven't seen.
Yeah, I think that there are a few people that are out there, and they're wonderful people. But I feel like I have what it takes, right? I have the ability to, put myself out there. I've done it, a couple times before. Ran for office in 2014, was unsuccessful. Won my election in 2018, and then people thought, oh, well, that was just a fluke. That was, he was just riding on the Trump coat waves, because don't forget that was Trump 1.0. But then I got reelected in 2022, and I think it's a lot of the fact that I worked so hard to show up for people in my community. I worked so hard with my constituent services. I mean, my volunteers in 2022 were like, oh my gosh, it's it's so easy knocking doors for you because people would open the door and be like, oh yeah, I'm voting for him. He worked on XYZ, whatever. And also I get a hard time from some of my colleagues because I author a lot of resolutions, right? But when you hand deliver one of these resolutions to someone's family or to an organization and they feel seen and heard, it's like a piece of gold to them, right? So for me, I'm going to continue to keep doing that type of stuff, even as a member of Congress. It's this, to me, it's the small things that matter. As a state senator, I pride myself on watching what happens, in terms of what comes into the inbox, the phone calls that come into the office. I ask the staff to run reports so I can kind of see, how we're doing. Because at the end of the day, it's not about me. It is about the people that I represent.
There would seem to be a lot of division in the country if you look and see on either side. Does that change, and are you part of that if you get to Washington?
Well, I'm certainly going to try to be a bridge builder. To me, that's how I've always operated, especially in the state Senate. I do my very best, to work with my colleagues. I try to give them a heads up when I have amendments, to their bills. And I think we owe it to the American people, to send people to Washington, D.C., like myself, and we owe it to the American people to work on their behalf. And I think so many people are just so tired of the mudslinging and all that stuff. And I think people just want us to roll up our sleeves and to hear hear the problems and work on the solutions. That's what I've been doing in the state Senate these past 8 years. I can't say that I was, the best at it, but that's what I strived for. And I feel like I'll do that as a member of Congress.
Senator, anything else that you want to add that I haven't thought to ask that gets to the heart of the matter, the heart of this decision for you, the transition that it could be stepping away from all of your work in the Indiana Senate?
First and foremost, I just want to say thank you to the people of District 29. As I think back about, winning on that election night, don't forget that was my 36th birthday. And what an amazing birthday gift that the people gave to me on that night. And that's why I've never stopped, thinking about how I can best serve them. To me, this has been the best job of my life. It has been a gift for me to be able to give back. And I'm so touched when I'm out in the district or even get little cards at the State House that just say, thank you so much for hearing me, for seeing me. It's really that type of stuff that keeps me going. So I have to give a big thank you to District 29 constituents for trusting me to be their voice in the state Senate. I am not going anywhere. I'm still gonna represent them, some of them, but hopefully we will do it at the federal level in Washington, D.C. And I know that this is the time to do it. If there's ever a time to do it, this is the time. And I feel like so many people are paying attention to what's going on, right? Especially after the last round of redistricting, right? So many people understood, like, oh wow, your local legislators have more of an impact, right? And it's going to be the same way going to Washington, D.C. What we're going to be doing in the United States Congress is going to have an impact on people, and folks should pay attention to that. But just really thank you to the constituents. Thank you to the staff at the State House. I mean, we cannot do the stuff that we do without them. So I try to be kind to them. I don't try to see them as staff members, but colleagues. Even our interns. I always tell them, like, I see you as another member of the team, right? I mean, we need the extra eyes, the ears, the extra set of hands, and so so even they play a very pivotal role in what we do there. My colleagues in the state Senate, don't forget I'm one of 10 Senate Democrats, and so I serve on 8 committees. So the workload is a lot, but it allows me to see different things that are happening in our state. Be able to celebrate different things that are happening in our state. And even my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I want to thank them for all the good conversations and just the support that I've felt over the past couple of years. And so I'm just really filled with gratitude, really, as I go on to this next level.
And Ford is far from the only one running for this district. He isn't even the only Democrat. In addition to Ford, there is also Muncie veteran Jackson Franklin, who says he is not accepting any political action committee or PAC donations. Indianapolis professor Todd Shelton, also a veteran, has also filed to run in the Democratic primary in May. On the Republican side, Spartz has indeed filed to run. In 2023, she had said she wouldn't run for re-election before reversing course, but she has filed to run again while saying she will refuse any committee assignments. Republican Scott King has also filed, planning to challenge Spartz in the Republican primary. And of course, more candidates could throw their hat in the ring. The deadline to file to run is on February 6th. And now that Ford is running for Congress, that opens up his state Senate seat. At least 2 candidates have already launched campaigns to take his place. Dustin?
Yeah, a packed house, a packed race, that's for sure, and a couple more weeks before the deadline. All right, Emily, thank you. And Ford's announcement wasn't the only one from Senate Democrats this week. State Senator Andrea Hundley of Indianapolis announced Friday she will not run for re-election this year. She hasn't said what her next career move will be after leaving the Senate, but she has made it clear she is not leaving politics or public service. In a statement, she told us, "Our city needs bold leadership to be a world-class destination for people to work, play, study, and stay. I am not going anywhere." In addition to being a state lawmaker, Hundley also served as a teacher and principal for 2 decades here in central Indiana. And that does it for this week's episode of Crossroads Politics. As always, if you have a question or a comment or a suggestion, email me. Send me a message on social media. I'd love to hear from you. I'm Dustin Grove. For Nikki, Emily, Matthew, and all of us here at 13 News, thanks for watching. We hope to see you next time.